The call came in at 11:47 p.m., not to Sergeant Dale Pruett's radio, not to dispatch. It came to his personal cell phone from a number he didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end said only 4 words before hanging up. "She's driving home now." Pruett didn't question it. He didn't ask who was calling or why. He pulled out of the gas station parking lot on Meridian Avenue, drove 2 blocks west, and positioned his cruiser behind a row of parked cars near the intersection of Cleary and 5th. He waited. 7 minutes later, a silver Honda Accord turned off 5th onto Cleary. He flipped his lights on before she'd gone 30 feet. Maren Doyle pulled over immediately. She was still in her scrubs, dark teal, the kind the surgical floor required. There was a hospital badge clipped to her collar and a parking tag from St. Augustine Medical Center hanging from her rearview mirror. She had worked a 12-hour shift. Her right shoulder was wrapped in a brace she'd been wearing since the accident 4 months ago. A roadside IED in Kandahar, the one that had ended her second deployment and started a 2-year fight with the VA. She kept her hands on the wheel and waited. Pruett took his time getting out of the car. He walked slowly, deliberately, flashlight cutting through the window before he'd even reached the driver's side. Lice and registration. Maren reached for the glove box. Her right arm moved stiffly, the brace limiting her range of motion, and she had to angle her whole body to pull the documents out. She handed them over without comment. Pruett studied them longer than necessary. Then, "You've been drinking tonight?" "No. You sure?" "Yes, you came out of the Haron district. Lot of bars over there." Maren kept her voice even. "I came from St. Augustine. I work there. I'm a surgical nurse. My badge is right here if you need. I'll decide what I need." He shone the flashlight directly in her eyes. "Step out of the vehicle." She hesitated, not from defiance, but from pain. Getting out of a car without full use of her right shoulder required a specific sequence of movements. Unlock the door, push with the left arm, rotate the body, step down carefully. It took her longer than it would have taken anyone else. Pruett stepped back, arms crossed, watching. "Can I ask why you pulled me over?" Maren said as she stood on the curb. "Failure to signal at Cleary and 5th. She'd signaled. She always signaled, habit from 2 tours driving convoy vehicles in conditions where a missed signal could mean getting separated from your unit, but she didn't say that. "I'd like you to walk this line for me," Pruett said, pointing to a crack in the asphalt running parallel to the curb. Maren looked at it. Then she looked at him. "I have a shoulder injury. I can show you the documentation." "Walk the line, ma'am?" "I'm not impaired. I was at work. I can give you my supervisor's number. I can show you my hospital badge. I'm going to ask you one more time." She walked the line. Her gait was slightly uneven. It always was, now, the result of the shrapnel that had grazed her hip alongside the shoulder damage. She knew it looked bad. She knew exactly how it looked, and she knew there was nothing she could do about it except keep walking and hope the body camera on his chest was recording everything clearly. It was. She didn't know that yet. Pruett told her to put her hands behind her back. "I'm not under arrest," Maren said. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't crying. She was the calmest person on that sidewalk, and somehow that seemed to make Pruett angrier. "You failed a field sobriety test. I have a documented physical disability. I didn't fail anything. I walked your line, hands behind your back." She thought about the VA appointment she had in the morning. She thought about her apartment 6 blocks away, the leftovers she hadn't gotten to eat, the phone charger she'd left at the nurse's station and needed to retrieve tomorrow. She thought for a brief and specific second about the roadside in Kandahar, the way time had slowed after the explosion, the way her body had made decisions before her mind caught up with what was happening. She put her hands behind her back. The cuffs went on. Pruett walked her to his cruiser and put her in the back seat. He didn't explain the charges. He didn't read her Miranda rights. He went back to her car, looked through the window with his flashlight for a long moment, and then radioed for a tow. Maren sat in the back of the cruiser and counted her breaths. It was something she'd learned in the Army. When you can't control what's happening around you, control what's happening inside you. In through the nose, 4 counts. Hold, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. She was on her 8th cycle when another set of headlights appeared in the rear window. A second cruiser pulled up behind Pruett's. The officer who stepped out was a woman, Officer Becca Harlan, 7 years on the force, known in the district for being methodical in a way that made some of her colleagues uncomfortable. She'd gotten the call on the radio and responded because the location was in her patrol zone and Pruett hadn't formally called for backup. She looked at the Honda on the curb. She looked at Maren through the back window of the cruiser. She looked at Pruett. "What have you got?" she asked. "Do stop." She failed the walk and turn. Harlan walked to the cruiser and looked in at Maren. The scrubs, the badge, the shoulder brace, the absolute stillness of someone who was not drunk and knew it. Has she been processed? Not yet. What's her name? Maren Doyle, 29, registered nurse at St. Augustine. Harlan looked at Pruett. She's wearing a brace. She still had to walk the line. Did she walk it? Pruett didn't answer immediately, and Harlan noticed the pause. She had been a cop long enough to know what a certain kind of pause meant. "I need to see your body cam footage," she said. "It's department property. You don't have authority. I'm the senior officer on scene right now, Dale." Her voice was quiet. "Show me the footage." What happened in the next 4 minutes would matter a great deal in the weeks that followed. Pruett pulled up the footage on his camera's playback screen. Harlan watched without speaking. She watched Maren explain the brace. She watched Pruett tell her to walk the line anyway. She watched Maren complete the walk with an uneven but controlled gait, the gait of someone with a documented injury, not the gait of someone impaired. She also watched Pruett look directly at Maren's hospital badge when he shone his flashlight at the window. He had seen it. He had registered it. He had asked about drinking anyway. Harlan stepped away from Pruett and opened the back door of the cruiser. "Ms. Doyle," she said, "I'm going to remove the cuffs. I need you to stay here for a few minutes while I sort something out." Maren's wrists were sore where the metal had pressed. She rubbed them slowly and said nothing. "You're a surgical nurse?" "Yes. And that's where you were coming from tonight?" "Yes. I can have my charge nurse call to confirm. Her name is Paula Reyes. She was at the station until at least 11:30. "I believe you," Harlan said. Those 3 words. She would think about them later, not because they were extraordinary, but because of how unlikely they had felt while she was sitting in that back seat counting her breaths. Harlan went back to Pruett. The conversation was short. Maren couldn't hear it from inside the cruiser, but she could see the body language. Harlan's stillness, Pruett's hands moving, the way he kept looking back toward the Honda like he was calculating something. Whatever he was calculating, it didn't work out the way he'd hoped. The DUI charge was not filed that night. Pruett released Maren's vehicle from the tow hold. He did not speak to her again. He got into his cruiser and drove away, and Maren stood on the curb at Cleary and 5th at 12:40 in the morning and watched its taillights disappear. Harlan gave her a card. "If you want to file a complaint," she said, "this is the number. I'm going to file my own incident report tonight. Whatever you decide, that report will be in the system." Maren looked at the card. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you didn't do anything wrong," Harlan said, "and because it's going to happen to someone else if nobody says anything." She filed the complaint the next morning. She filed it with the shoulder brace still on, sitting in a plastic chair in the district's community affairs office, filling out a form that asked her to describe the incident in her own words. She wrote carefully and specifically, the way the Army had taught her to write incident reports: facts, sequence, physical details, no interpretation. She noted the time of the stop, the stated reason, the field sobriety test, the cuffs, the tow order, the duration of detention. She noted that she had attempted to show her hospital badge and explain her physical injury, and that Officer Pruett had disregarded both. She noted that she had a VA appointment that morning that she was now 20 minutes late for. The complaint went to Lieutenant Carver in Internal Affairs. Carver was 62 years old, 3 years from retirement, and had reviewed thousands of complaints over the course of his career. He called Harlan first, then pulled Pruett's body cam footage, then pulled the dash cam from both cruisers. He watched the footage twice. Then he called the hospital and spoke to the charge nurse, Paula Reyes, who confirmed that Maren Doyle had clocked out at 11:31 p.m. after a 12-hour shift and had not consumed alcohol during her time on the property. Carver called the union rep. Then he called Pruett. The investigation took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, Maren worked her shifts, attended her VA appointments, went to physical therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and received 3 phone calls she didn't recognize and didn't answer. She mentioned the calls in a follow-up statement to Internal Affairs. She noted the dates and times. It was an investigator named Tolliver who connected the original tip call, the one that had gone to Pruitt's personal cell phone at 11:47 p.m., to a number registered to a logistics company that did not appear to have a listed address or any public-facing business operations. It took Tolliver another week to trace the company's formation documents to an LLC whose registered agent shared a last name with the family of a man Maren had testified against in a malpractice proceeding 4 months earlier. A proceeding in which her testimony had been decisive. A proceeding that had not gone well for the man's family. She had not known, when she submitted that testimony, that the family had connections to 2 members of the Meridian precinct. Pruitt was one of them. The formal hearing was held in the 3rd week of November. Maren sat at the complainant's table in a room that was smaller and more administrative-looking than courtrooms on television. Fluorescent lights. A folding table for the panel. Water pitchers that nobody touched. She had asked for a union representative for herself as well, which she was entitled to as a veteran through a legal aid organization the VA had referred her to. The representative's name was Garrett, and he was 26 years old and extremely thorough. Pruitt's attorney argued that the stop was consistent with observed traffic violations and that the field sobriety test was a standard protocol. He argued that Pruitt could not have known the nature of Maren's injury from a brief visual observation through a car window. He argued that Officer Harlan's intervention, while well-intentioned, had been unauthorized. Garrett presented the bodycam footage, the dashcam footage, the hospital clock-out records, the VA records documenting Maren's injury, and the phone records showing the call to Pruitt's personal cell phone 17 minutes before the stop. The panel asked Pruitt directly whether he had received a call prior to the stop. He said he had not. The phone records showed that he had. The panel recessed for 90 minutes. When they returned, the presiding officer read the findings in a flat, administrative voice that somehow made every word land harder. Conduct unbecoming an officer, abuse of authority, filing a false statement in a departmental proceeding, termination, effective immediately, loss of pension benefits pending review, referral to the county district attorney for further inquiry regarding the false statement. The second officer, the one whose family name had appeared on the LLC formation documents, was placed on administrative leave pending a separate investigation. Maren sat with her hands flat on the table and listened. She had learned, somewhere between Kandahar and this fluorescent-lit room, that the moment of resolution rarely felt the way you expected it to. You didn't always cry. You didn't always feel the tension leave your body in a rush. Sometimes you just felt very tired and very clear and strangely light, like something you'd been carrying for a long time had been quietly set down. She drove home afterward. She signaled at every turn. In the weeks that followed, the case moved through channels she didn't have to manage directly. Garrett handled most of it. The district attorney's office filed charges against Pruitt for the false statement. A civil suit, filed on Maren's behalf, named the department and both officers. The LLC investigation was turned over to a financial crimes unit. The hospital administrator called her to check in, which she hadn't expected. Paula Reyes, the charge nurse, had already told the staff what had happened, not as gossip, but as information, the way clinical information was shared on the floor. The day Maren returned to work after the hearing, 3 of her colleagues were standing near the locker room when she came in, and there was a moment, brief, unremarkable looking, where they just stood there and looked at her. One of them, a travel nurse named Odie, who had been at St. Augustine for only 6 weeks, said, "We heard. We're glad you're okay." It was the kind of thing that was easy to say and meant a lot anyway. Officer Harslinchen received a commendation for her conduct during the incident and her cooperation with the internal investigation. She requested, and was granted, transfer to the Community Liaison Unit, where she worked on a civilian oversight proposal that had been stalled in committee for 2 years. The proposal passed the City Council in the spring, 13 votes to 4. Maren was in the gallery when the vote was called. She hadn't been asked to speak and hadn't sought out a seat near the front. She sat in the back row of the gallery in her regular clothes. Not her scrubs, not her dress uniform from the Army, which she still had in a garment bag in her closet, and listened to each council member state their vote in turn. After the meeting, Harlan found her in the hallway outside the chamber. "You didn't have to come," Harlan said. "I know," Maren said. "I wanted to see it." They shook hands. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It was a Tuesday evening in a municipal building with bad carpet and outdated overhead lighting, and two women stood in a hallway and shook hands over something that had been done correctly after a long time of being done wrong. Maren drove home, she signaled. She made the leftovers she still had in her refrigerator. She always made too much on Sundays. One of those habits she'd kept from the years when she was cooking for a unit instead of for herself. She sat at the kitchen table and ate and didn't turn the television on. Her shoulder was better than it had been in November. Not fully healed. It might never be fully healed. Her orthopedic surgeon had been honest about that. But functional in a way it hadn't been before. She could reach overhead without the sharp catch of pain that had become so normal she'd stopped noticing it. She had a shift in 8 hours. She would drive to the hospital. She would signal at every turn, the way she always did, the way they'd taught her to do on convoy runs in places far from Meridian Avenue and Cleary and Fifth. She would clock in. She would do the job. The thing about surviving she had learned. In Kandahar, and in a backseat at midnight, and in a fluorescent-lit room where someone finally said the truth out loud, is that it isn't a single moment. It's every morning after. It's the choice to show up, to do the thing, to trust that the next person you hand something over to might actually hold it right. Most of the time, they didn't, but sometimes they did, and sometimes that was enough to change what came after.